Security called it a predator. He called it curious. The containment alarms didn't stutter. They howled. Red strobes flooded the observation wing as reinforced blast shutters slammed into place across 3 corridors. Tactical drones deployed overhead. Alien officers scrambled toward elevated platforms, issuing overlapping commands in 3 languages. And through the transparent containment wall, something luminous and fluid stepped calmly past the final barrier. Dr. Mateo Alvarez exhaled once. Then he reached into his pocket. 12 hours earlier, the organism had been a salvage anomaly, embedded in crystalline wreckage, drifting beside a dead trade beacon. The beacon itself had collapsed decades ago, its signal core fused into glittering debris after a power cascade no one had ever fully explained. Merchant ships avoided the region out of habit rather than regulation. It was quiet space. Too quiet, according to the salvage crew that first detected the faint bioluminescent pulse inside the crystal mass. They had assumed trapped radiation. Then the light shifted in response to their scan. The xenobiology station Orpheon received the object under sealed escort. The crystalline debris was transferred into a zero-vibration intake bay, suspended in a magnetic cradle to prevent stress fractures. Mateo had been called in before the outer layers were even cut away. He specialized in bioelectric adaptation, particularly organisms that manipulated environmental fields as a survival mechanism. The salvage report mentioned electromagnetic distortion around the debris. That detail alone justified escalation. When the crystal shell was carefully fractured open, the room fell silent. Inside rested a being unlike anything in the galactic registry. Its body appeared elongated and fluid, composed of layered translucent filaments that refracted light into soft gradients of blue and green. No visible mouth, no defined sensory organs. Along what might have been its spine ran a narrow line of bioluminescence that pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythms. It did not thrash when exposed. It did not recoil. It simply unfolded. Initial scans began immediately. Molecular analysis returned organized complexity. It was undeniably biological. Yet when technicians attempted to cross-reference its genetic signature against the interspecies archive, the system returned null. Not corrupted data, not partial alignment, no match. Over 8,000 cataloged biospheres, millions of indexed species, nothing. Containment protocols doubled within the hour. Mateo observed from behind reinforced glass as the organism moved for the first time. Its limbs extended like flowing ribbons, supporting its body with elegant balance. It crossed the containment floor without haste, occasionally pausing to tilt its elongated head towards scanning equipment. "Does it show stress response?" Commander Irix asked from behind him. The Varun officer stood rigid, scaled hide reflecting laboratory light in sharp angles. "None," Mateo replied. "Heart rhythm is stable. Field emissions minimal." Field emissions? As if answering the question, a faint shimmer surrounded the organism when a diagnostic beam intensified. The beam bent slightly, dispersing across its surface. Mateo leaned closer to the display. "It's generating a localized bioelectric distortion. Adaptive shielding." Containment protocols tripled. Energy barriers were layered around the primary chamber. Suppression fields calibrated to non-lethal thresholds activated in standby mode. Security drones repositioned along ceiling rails, their emitters humming quietly. The organism did not react like prey. Predatory species confined against their will exhibited predictable markers: tension across musculature, sudden lunges, attempts to damage structural weaknesses. This being showed none of that. It examined the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Its bioluminescent spine pulsed brighter when equipment powered up nearby, then softened when systems stabilized. 3 hours into observation, subtle distortions appeared along the primary energy barrier. Technicians recalibrated immediately. Diagnostics confirmed full power integrity. No fluctuations, no overload. Yet the barrier shimmered unevenly whenever the organism approached within a meter. "It's interfering with field cohesion," Dr. Senavoral noted quietly from her console. "Is it attacking the grid?" Irix demanded. Mateo shook his head. "No surge, no spike. It's not forcing the barrier." He watched carefully as the organism extended one limb toward the energy field. There was no discharge, no crackle. The limb passed through. Silence consumed the lab. The rest of its body followed, phasing through the barrier as if stepping through mist. The field did not collapse. It remained active, humming at full strength. The organism simply did not register as obstructed by it. Containment alarms triggered instantly. Secondary grids sealed around the chamber. Blast shutters dropped in adjacent corridors. Station-wide alerts echoed through Orpheon. Inside the reinforced secondary enclosure, the organism paused beneath flashing emergency lights. Red illumination washed across its translucent form, blending with its natural glow into shifting hues of amber and violet. Matteo studied its posture. No expansion of mass. No coiling. No visible preparation for attack. Its spine pulsed once, slow and steady. It neutralized a Class 7 barrier, Irix said, voice tight. We cannot allow it into populated sections. It walked through, Matteo replied. There's a difference. Doctor, that distinction may not matter. In the control center, tactical command convened through holographic projection. Representatives from 3 species debated lethal authorization. Venting the entire containment wing into vacuum was placed on the table. Matteo felt the weight of that option settle over the room. Before consensus could be reached, distortions rippled across the secondary grid. This time, the failure was visible. The energy curtain flickered, then thinned near the organism's outstretched limb. No sparks, no system failure alerts. The grid simply ceased to interact with it. The being stepped through. Emergency sirens howled. Corridor blast doors sealed in segments to limit spread. Suppression drones descended, targeting sensors locking onto the luminous figure now standing calmly in the hallway beyond containment. Alien security officers took elevated firing positions. Their armor plating glinted beneath rotating red strobes. The organism did not run. It moved forward at a measured pace, head turning slightly as if cataloging its surroundings. When a drone adjusted altitude, the creature paused, observing the motion with quiet intensity. Matteo's pulse quickened, but not from fear. He saw no aggression. He saw curiosity. Authorization is seconds away, Vorel whispered. The organism stopped directly beneath the brightest emergency light. The red glow intensified the colors along its spine, producing a warm gold that radiated outward in slow waves. Weapons primed. Matteo stepped forward. Stand down, he said sharply. Several officers hesitated. Commander Irix turned toward him in disbelief. It has breached maximum containment. No, it hasn't harmed anyone. It has bypassed every defensive measure we possess. That does not equal hostility. Irix's frill plates flared in agitation. Predators test boundaries before striking. Matteo kept his gaze fixed on the being beyond the glass. Predators also display tension before they strike. This one isn't. The organism tilted its head slightly toward the observation window. Toward him. For a fraction of a second, Matteo felt unmistakably seen. He made his decision. Ignoring shouted protests behind him, he triggered the manual override on the inner hatch leading to the sealed corridor. The heavy door slid open with a pressurized hiss. Red emergency light flooded across his lab coat. He stepped inside. The hatch sealed behind him. The air felt charged, humming faintly from overlapping suppression fields. Drones shifted position above, recalibrating their aim to account for the human now standing between them and the unknown entity. Dr. Alvarez, Irix called over the comm. Return immediately. Matteo did not respond. He lowered his shoulders deliberately. He let his hands hang open at his sides. Then, slowly, he crouched, reducing height, reducing perceived threat. The organism's spine shifted from gold to soft green. That color change rippled gently along its filaments, like light moving across shallow water. Across the observation deck, officers froze. Because in their recorded history, predators did not lower themselves before unknown prey. Matteo's heart pounded in his ears. He forced his breathing to slow, steady, visible. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket. Security drones tightened their targeting matrices. He withdrew a small ration bar wrapped in clear polymer, standard issue protein and grain, honey-flavored. He began to unwrap it slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement. The faint crackle of the wrapper sounded unnaturally loud in the sealed corridor. The organism leaned forward a fraction. Its head tilted, Curious. Matteo extended his hand, palm up, offering the granola bar across the short distance between them. The red lights continued to flash. The alarms continued to howl. And in the middle of it all, a human knelt on a cold metal floor, holding out a snack to something no archive in the galaxy could name. The wrapper crackled softly between Matteo's fingers. Every weapon in the corridor tracked the sound. The organism did not retreat. It did not surge forward. It simply watched the small rectangle of compressed oats and honey as though it were witnessing a phenomenon equal in importance to the flashing alarms. Matteo kept his posture low and relaxed. His knees pressed against the metal floor. He made sure his shoulders remained down, spine curved slightly, gaze softened rather than fixed. Direct staring could be interpreted as challenge across dozens of species. He chose instead to look at the space just below the creature's luminous spine. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. His translator rendered the words across a spectrum of tones and frequencies. The device attempted mathematical harmonics rather than literal language. It was the closest approximation the station had to neutrality. The organism's spine pulsed brighter for half a second. In the observation deck above, Dr. Senna Vorel leaned toward her console. Electromagnetic amplitude increased in response to the audio emission, she reported. No spike in defensive shielding. Commander Irix's voice cut in, tight with restrained alarm. All suppression drones remain locked. If it advances beyond 2 meters from the human, fire. Matteo heard the order through his comm and ignored it. Slowly, carefully, he extended his arm until the granola bar rested at the edge of his reach. He did not lean forward. He did not close the remaining distance. The organism shifted its weight. Up close, it was even more intricate than it had appeared through reinforced glass. Its body was composed of semi-transparent filaments, layered over a faintly luminous core. The line of light along its spine carried color in subtle gradients, shifting from green to pale blue and back again. Where joints should have been, the filaments braided into thicker cords, suggesting structure without rigidity. It took one deliberate step closer. Drones adjusted position, emitters glowing brighter. "Hold," Matteo murmured, though he knew the command center could not hear that word as authority. The organism stopped within arm's reach. Its head tilted again, the movement small but unmistakably focused on the offering in his palm. Matteo noticed something else. There was still no predatory tension. Across species, aggression carried universal signals. Muscle contraction, surface expansion, chemical release. Even amorphous entities displayed energy concentration before striking. This being remained fluid, curious. One slender limb extended forward. The filaments at its ends separated and reformed, shaping themselves into a shallow cradle. A faint shimmer of bioelectric distortion surrounded the limb as it approached the granola bar. Matteo resisted the instinct to flinch. The limb made contact. A pulse of bright cyan shot from the point of contact up the creature's spine. Gasps erupted from the observation deck. The wrapper disintegrated silently, not burned, not torn, but separated into fine particulate, as if gently persuaded apart at the molecular level. The exposed granola bar hovered for a fraction of a second within the creature's luminous field. Matteo stared, fascinated despite the tension. The oats began to fragment. Not explosively, not violently. They dissolved into drifting motes that flowed along the filaments of the organism's limb, absorbed through light rather than ingestion. The color along its spine shifted gradually from cyan to warm gold. Bioelectric output rising, Vorel reported. No hostile surge. Patterns are rhythmic, almost harmonic. Harmonic with what? Irix demanded. Vorel hesitated. With the human's heart rate. Matteo blinked. You're certain? Correlation at 73% and climbing. The organism withdrew its limbs slightly, but did not retreat. The golden glow softened into a steady amber. Its head tilted again, this time not at the food, but at Matteo's face. For a strange, suspended moment, the alarms seemed distant. Matteo became acutely aware of his own breathing. Inhale, exhale. His heart still beat faster than baseline, but the sharp edge of fear had dulled into focused calm. The amber glow dimmed in response. He tested the theory. He inhaled deeply and deliberately slowed his exhale. The creature's spine shifted towards softer green. Across the deck, silence replaced argument. It is mirroring him, Voral whispered. Emotional mimicry behavior, or predatory attunement, Irix countered. Matteo shook his head slightly. No, if it were predatory, the synchronization would escalate toward dominance cues. It's matching my baseline, not overriding it. He slowly adjusted his posture, straightening just a few centimeters. The organism did the same. Not in imitation of shape, but in proportional adjustment of height. Matteo felt a flicker of awe. You're calibrating. The being took another step closer, until only half a meter separated them. The suppression drones recalibrated, confused by overlapping proximity readings. Their threat algorithms struggled to interpret a target that displayed no attack markers and a human who exhibited decreasing fear rather than increasing. Doctor, Irix said carefully. Can you retreat while it is docile? Matteo considered the request. He shifted his weight backward slightly, testing reaction. The creature's spine dimmed toward blue. Its body leaned forward a fraction, not lunging, but compensating for the increasing distance. Curiosity intensified. Matteo moved forward again, restoring the original spacing. The amber returned. He smiled faintly despite himself. It doesn't want me to leave. That is not reassuring, Irix replied. Matteo's gaze remained steady on the luminous being. It breached containment without damaging infrastructure. It avoided drones instead of disabling them. It absorbed food without aggression, and it is synchronizing with emotional signals. He spoke softly now, more to the creature than to command. You weren't escaping to hunt, you were exploring. At the word exploring, the translator emitted layered tones. The organism's spine flashed briefly, with a color Matteo had not yet seen, a soft violet threaded with silver. Voral sucked in a breath. New wavelength detected, increased coherence in its field pattern. The creature slowly lowered itself, not collapsing. Settling, it folded its limbs beneath its body, positioning itself on the corridor floor, directly across from Matteo's crouched form. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, almost courteous. The red emergency strobes continued to pulse around them, casting alternating shadows across metal walls. Yet in the center of the chaos, the organism remained calm. Matteo felt something unexpected then. Not fear, not triumph. Recognition. He extended his empty hand this time, palm up, without food. The organism hesitated only briefly, before extending a filament-tipped limb. It did not grasp his hand. Instead, it hovered just above his skin. A faint warmth spread across Matteo's palm. Not heat, energy. His translator chirped unexpectedly, registering patterned electromagnetic fluctuations too structured to be random interference. Voral's voice trembled over calm. Doctor, its field is encoding repetition. That may be structured output. Matteo swallowed. Are we looking at language? Possibly pre-linguistic, Voral replied, or emotional projection. The warmth intensified slightly, as Matteo's heart rate ticked upward in excitement. The creature's spine brightened, then softened again as he consciously calmed himself. A realization moved through the control room like a ripple. The breach had not been an act of aggression. It had been an attempt to cross a boundary it did not understand. The energy barriers were not obstacles in its perception. They were environmental variations. It passed through them as naturally as a human walked through fog. Commander Irix exhaled slowly. Stand down suppression drones, he ordered at last. Emitters dimmed. The corridor felt suddenly quieter. Matteo remained kneeling, hand extended, as the organism's filament hovered just above his skin. Command, Voral said carefully. I recommend provisional reclassification. Remove predator status. Silence followed. Then Irix spoke, voice measured. On what basis? Voral did not hesitate. Exploratory behavior, emotional synchronization, non-destructive barrier traversal, acceptance of offered sustenance, absence of predatory tension markers. Matteo felt the filament finally brush his palm. A soft pulse of light traveled between them. The amber glow along the creature's spine deepened into warm gold, steady and calm. Commander Irix's voice carried through the corridor speakers. Provisional classification updated. Unknown organism designated empathic explorer. Lethal authorization rescinded. Now, Matteo let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. The alarms gradually ceased their howl, fading into distant echoes as emergency lockdown protocols downgraded. The creature remained beside him, luminous and composed. For the first time since its arrival, the xenobiology station was not bracing for attack. It was witnessing first contact. 3 hours after the alarm stopped, the containment wing still smelled like overheated circuitry and nervous sweat. The blast shutters had retracted, but the corridors remained half-lit, as if the station itself hadn't decided whether to relax. Maintenance crews moved in pairs, checking field emitters, replacing scorched fuses, and muttering about how a barrier could be fully functional and still let something stroll through like it owned the place. Matteo stayed where he was, seated on the floor with his back against the corridor wall. A security medic had insisted on scanning him twice for bioelectric exposure, and once for human stubbornness, a category the device did not recognize but the medic claimed to see anyway. "You're fine," she said, sliding the scanner into her belt. "No arrhythmia, no tissue heating, no neurological drift." Matteo flexed his fingers. The warmth from the organism's touch had faded, leaving only an after sensation like he'd pressed his palm against a sun-warmed window. "I told you." She pointed a finger at him. "You told us you were fine while kneeling between a suppression drone and an unclassified life form. And," Matteo gave her a tired smile, "still fine." Above them, on the observation deck, Commander Irix watched through reinforced glass with the rigid patience of someone who had already rewritten 3 emergency reports in his head and hated each version equally. The organism remained nearby. It had chosen a spot at the junction where the corridor widened into a service alcove. The lighting there was softer, the red strobes finally replaced by neutral white. It lay folded in on itself, filaments tucked close, spine glowing a calm green. A small crowd of scientists and security officers stood at a safe distance, pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Matteo understood them. Everything about the being defied the station's instincts. It had bypassed maximum containment like a suggestion. It had absorbed food without a mouth. It had synchronized with human emotion, as if Matteo's nervous system were a tuning fork. And now it was resting. Like it belonged. Vorel approached, careful footsteps on metal decking. The Thren analyst held a tablet angled toward her chest, as if shielding it from curiosity. Her large, reflective eyes moved between Matteo and the organism. "It has not moved in 47 minutes, she said. Matteo glanced at the glow along the creature's spine. "It's not dormant, it's settled." Vorel tilted her head. "You sound as if it chose you." Matteo rubbed his palm, remembering the soft brush of filament. "I think it chose the first thing that didn't try to turn it into a problem." Commander Irix's voice came through Matteo's comm, clipped and formal. "Dr. Alvarez, you will return to the lab for debrief. You have accumulated enough proximity exposure to qualify as a field test." Matteo looked up at the observation window. "With respect, Commander, debrief can wait. If we push too fast, we lose trust." Irix's frill plates flared slightly, a controlled expression of displeasure. "Trust is not a containment protocol." "No," Matteo agreed. "But it might be the only one that works." Behind Vorel, 2 maintenance technicians argued quietly about whether the secondary grid should be replaced entirely or simply recalibrated to account for whatever physics this thing is using. One of them saw Matteo watching and offered a tight grin. "I've got 20 credits, says you name it something adorable," the tech said. Matteo's eyebrows rose. "I'm not naming it." The tech shrugged. "Someone will. That's what happens. First contact, then paperwork, then someone gives the cosmic mystery a nickname like Sparkles." Vorel looked faintly horrified. "Is that a human custom?" "It is a human flaw," Matteo said. The organism lifted its head, not toward the technicians, toward Matteo, the green along its spine brightened by a shade. Matteo stood slowly, careful to keep his movement smooth. He stepped away from the wall and approached the being at a gentle pace. He stopped at the distance where it had first settled, then lowered himself into a crouch again. "Hey," he said softly. The translator offered harmonics. The organism's spine shifted from green to gold, steady and warm. Vorel's tablet chimed. She glanced down, then up again, eyes wide. "It is emitting structured pulses again. The intervals match your speech cadence." Matteo nodded. It's trying. He opened his hands to show he carried nothing. I don't have snacks this time. Sorry. Gold softened toward pale amber. The organism extended a limb, hovering just above his forearm. A faint shimmer rippled across its filaments, but not as shielding, more like a ripple of attention. Matteo held still. A soft pulse moved from the limb into his skin, and with it came a sensation that was hard to describe. Not words, not images, more like a memory of standing on a shoreline as waves rolled in, each one different but part of the same rhythm. Matteo swallowed. Okay, that's new. Vorel stepped closer, careful. Doctor, are you experiencing neurological interference? No, Matteo said, though his voice sounded distant even to him. It's communicating, I think. The pulse came again. This time, Matteo felt a subtle shift in his own breathing. The organism seemed to coax his exhale longer, smoother, until his chest relaxed. Then, the station lights flickered. Every head turned. A low hum rolled through the corridor as power systems adjusted. A maintenance panel on the wall flashed warnings, then stabilized. Vorel stared at her tablet. Electromagnetic output increased sharply. It synchronized with station power cycling. Matteo looked at the organism. Did you do that? The being's spine flashed violet threaded with silver, the same color that had appeared when he'd said, exploring. The glow spread outward along its filaments, like a ripple. Commander Irix's voice snapped through comm. Report. Why did my corridor just dip 3% in power? A technician answered quickly from a nearby junction. Not sure, Commander. The power bus corrected itself. No damage. Matteo kept his eyes on the organism. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like listening. Vorel's fingers tightened on her tablet. If it can sense station systems the way it senses your heart rate, it may be reacting to power fluctuations the way a human reacts to a sudden sound. Matteo nodded slowly. Then, containment barriers weren't barriers. They were loud noises. The thought settled into the group, changing the weight of the air. They had built cages out of energy fields. The organism had walked through them because it didn't perceive them as solid, but it had still noticed them, felt them, responded to them. And when those fields escalated, the station had been shouting at it. Matteo rose carefully and turned to Vorel. We need a quieter space. Vorel hesitated. The containment chamber is compromised. Not that, Matteo said. A space without barriers. Controlled, but not aggressive. Something like a neutral room. Soft lighting. Minimal EM noise. Commander Irix answered before Vorel could. That is not approved. Matteo looked up at the observation window. Commander, it is already outside containment. Our options are either keep treating it like a weapon until someone panics and shoots it, or give it a place where it doesn't have to keep proving it can be calm. Irix's silence stretched. Then, grudgingly, you have 1 hour. It will be escorted. It will be monitored. If it interferes with station systems again, we revert to suppression. Matteo exhaled. Fair. Within minutes, the corridor became a carefully choreographed procession. 2 security officers walked ahead, weapons lowered but ready. Drones floated at a distance, emitters set to passive tracking. Vorel and 2 xenobiology staff followed with portable sensors. Matteo stayed closest to the organism, moving slowly, letting it match his pace. It did. Whenever he slowed, it slowed. When he paused at intersections, it paused, head tilting, as if waiting for him to choose a direction. The station's crew watched from doorways and observation ports. Some looked frightened, some looked fascinated. One junior engineer, apparently overwhelmed, whispered, "That thing is following him like a stray comet." Matteo heard it and almost laughed, then stopped himself. Humor was useful, but not when it turned a living being into a spectacle. They reached a decommissioned horticulture module near the old recreation ring. The room had once been used to grow food supplements, herbs, and decorative plants for diplomatic visits. Now it sat mostly empty, racks dismantled, only a few stubborn vines still clinging to hydroponic lines. The air inside smelled faintly of soil substitute and clean water. Soft overhead lights glowed in a warm spectrum. Most importantly, the module's electromagnetic footprint was low. The old grow lamps had been removed, and the power lines were quiet. Matteo stepped inside first, then turned and beckoned gently with an open hand. The organism paused at the threshold, Its spine shifted toward blue, a cautious tone, then softened as Matteo remained still. It entered. The moment it crossed into the horticulture module, the glow along its spine changed, brightening into a gentle green that matched the room's warmth. It moved forward, then stopped, and angled its head toward the remaining vines. One filament limb extended, hovering above a leaf. The leaf trembled, not from touch, but from the faint field around the limb. The plant's surface reflected a shimmer of light, and for a second, the organism's spine displayed a color that looked almost like the leaf's own green, but brighter, richer, as if it had sampled the plant's presence. Voral's sensors chirped rapidly. She stared at her readout. It is reading bioelectric potentials in the plant tissue. Matteo kept his voice low. It's like it's greeting it. A security officer, a tall Kesh with plated armor, shifted uneasily. It is interacting with station biology. That is a risk. Matteo glanced at the officer. So am I. I shed skin cells everywhere. The Kesh looked confused. Voral made a startled sound that might have been laughter. The organism turned toward the sound. Its spine flashed a quick amber, then returned to green. Matteo felt the faintest brush of warmth against his mind again, like a question. He answered the only way he knew how. He placed his hand against his own chest. Me, he said. Then he pointed gently toward the organism. You. He paused, then gestured to the vines. Plant. The translator layered harmonics, uncertain. The organism's spine pulsed. Green, gold, violet. Voral's eyes widened. It repeated the sequence. It may be mapping concepts. Matteo tried again, slower. He pointed to the room. Here. Green. He pointed toward the doorway beyond, the corridor. There. Blue. He pointed to the nearest security drone hovering outside the module. Machine. The organism's spine flickered pale white, then a sharp silver. The drone's sensors chirped and adjusted orientation, as if unsettled. Matteo raised his eyebrows. That's an opinion. Commander Irix's voice came over calm, more controlled now. Doctor, explain why my drone just registered a localized electromagnetic spike. Matteo watched the organism's spine soften again, as if it had noticed the drone's reaction. Not a spike, Commander, a label. A label can become a weapon, or a language, Matteo replied. The organism moved deeper into the module. It circled slowly, examining the hydroponic lines, the floor vents, the condensation on a cold pipe. It avoided direct contact with sensors, stepping around portable equipment with careful precision. Exploratory, not destructive. After several minutes, it returned to Matteo and settled near him, folding its limbs beneath its body. It did not press close, but it chose proximity, aligning its position so that Matteo sat within its field. The ambient noise in the module felt different, quieter. Matteo realized his own heartbeat had slowed. So had the anxiety in the room. Voral checked her readout twice, then looked up. Doctor, the emotional baseline of everyone in here is dropping. Even the security officers. Matteo glanced around. She was right. The Kesh officer's shoulders had lowered slightly. The drones hovered higher, as if no longer bracing for conflict. Even Voral's hands had stopped trembling. The organism's field was not just mirroring. It was smoothing. Matteo sat on the floor, careful and slow, and met the creature's attention again. You calm things down, he said. Gold. He pointed to himself. I calm down. Green. He pointed to the doorway again. Station is loud. Blue, then a faint flicker of violet, threaded with silver, the exploring color. Matteo felt that shoreline sensation again, but now it came with a subtle impression of direction. Not a map, but a pull. Like the organism remembered the place it had come from, and the station's corridors were only a temporary puzzle, he kept his face neutral, but his stomach tightened. Voral, he said softly, I think it didn't drift here by accident. Voral's eyes narrowed. You believe it traveled intentionally? Matteo watched the organism's spine pulse in steady rhythm. I think the crystalline wreckage wasn't just debris. It might have been a vessel, or a cocoon, or both. Voral glanced at her tablet, then back at the organism. Then we must determine what it wants. Matteo nodded. And we have to do it without scaring it into another exploration of our power grid. A faint amber flicker ran along the organism's spine, and Matteo felt a brief warmth that carried an odd, gentle amusement, as if it had understood the tone, if not the words. The Kesh officer shifted and spoke, voice cautious. "Dr. Alvarez, if it can influence emotions, can it influence decisions?" Matteo looked up at the officer. "It's not pushing, it's harmonizing, like adjusting a radio until the static fades." Vorel added quietly, "But even harmonizing can change behavior." Matteo did not deny it. "That's why we do this carefully. Consent matters, even if we can't explain the word yet." Commander Irix's voice returned, less sharp than before. "Doctor, you have 30 minutes remaining in your granted hour. Provide actionable progress." Matteo looked at the organism, then at Vorel's sensor display filled with patterns and correlations. Actionable progress meant something the command structure could understand, something that justified not venting a wing into vacuum. Matteo chose the simplest truth. "It is not hostile," he said into calm. "It responds to calm with calm. It reacts to station systems like sensory input, not targets. And it is attempting structured communication through color, rhythm, and field modulation." "Number." He hesitated, then added, "Also it likes granola bars." A beat of silence. Vorel made a sound that might have been a choked laugh. Then, unexpectedly, Commander Irix replied, "Noted." "Noted." Matteo lowered his comm volume and turned back to the organism. He reached into his pocket again, slower this time, making sure everyone could see the motion. He withdrew another ration bar, held it up where the organism could observe, and waited. Its spine brightened immediately, gold warming into amber. Matteo unwrapped it carefully, then placed it on the floor between them, instead of offering it from his hand. The organism extended a limb, absorbed the bar with the same delicate molecular separation, and then, after a moment, pulsed a steady green. Matteo felt the warmth again, softer, paired with something that felt like approval. Vorel stared at her readouts. "Doctor, the field pattern shifted at the same time you altered the offering method. It responded to your intent, not just the food." Matteo nodded slowly. "It understands gestures. It understands tone. It might even understand choice." The organism lifted its head and turned toward the ceiling, toward the direction of the station's outer hull. Violet threaded with silver rippled along its spine. The shoreline sensation returned, stronger now, edged with a faint urgency. Not fear, not aggression. Purpose. Matteo's throat went dry. He looked at Vorel. "It wants something outside this room." Vorel's eyes widened as her tablet chimed with a fresh alert. "Doctor, it just synchronized with the station's long-range sensor array." Matteo stared upward, feeling the echo of that pull inside his chest. "It's not just exploring us," he said softly. "It's trying to find something, or someone." And for the first time since the crystalline wreckage arrived, Matteo realized the organism might not be the only mystery drifting in quiet space. The horticulture module felt smaller once the signal locked. Matteo remained seated on the floor across from the organism, watching violet threaded with silver ripples steadily along its spine. That color had come to mean direction. Intention. Something beyond the walls of Orpheon. Vorel's tablet chimed with a cleaner tone than before. "External signal stabilized," she said. "Two distinct sources, both aligned with the debris field origin point." Commander Irix's voice carried through the speakers. "Distance? Approximately 2 light hours beyond the wreckage. Slow drift, no weapon signatures." Matteo placed a hand against his chest. "You're hearing them." The organism's spine brightened, violet deepening toward gold at its center. The shoreline sensation returned, no longer lonely. Expectant. "It didn't escape," Matteo said quietly. "It was searching." Vorel nodded, eyes fixed on her readings. "When it synchronizes with you, the external waveform clarifies. You are stabilizing its output." Matteo let out a soft breath. "It used me as a reference point." Commander Irix was silent for several seconds. When he spoke, his tone had shifted from suspicion to calculation. "Prepare a reconnaissance shuttle. Dr. Alvarez will accompany. The organism remains under observation." The decision moved quickly after that. Within the hour, Matteo stood inside Shuttle Bay 3, suited but unhelmeted, watching technicians secure equipment. The organism rested beside him, spine glowing calm green. It stayed close without pressing against him, matching his pace whenever he moved. "Once we're out there," Vorel said over comm from the control deck, "maintain steady respiration. We need clean synchronization." "That, Noli?" Matteo gave a small nod. "Understood." The shuttle launched smoothly, clearing Orpheon's docking ring and accelerating into the dark. Stars stretched briefly, then settled into stillness. Inside the cockpit, systems hummed at low output. The organism positioned itself near the forward viewport. Its spine shifted gradually from green to violet as they approached the signal coordinates. Vorel's voice came through, hushed. Signal strength increasing, confirming multiple sources now. At least 3. Matteo leaned forward slightly. Shapes emerged ahead, faint at first, then distinct. 3 crystalline structures floated in formation, elongated and intact, their surfaces glowing with internal pulses, identical to the organism's. Unlike the fractured debris that had delivered it to the station, these vessels were whole. Inside each, luminous movement shimmered. Matteo felt something inside his chest loosen. "You weren't alone," he murmured. The organism's spine flared gold, then violet, then gold again in rapid succession. A pulse radiated from the lead crystalline vessel, crossing the space between them. It struck the shuttle like a gentle wave, strong enough to flicker instrumentation but not damage it. The organism answered with its own pulse. The other vessels responded. Light rippled across the formation in layered harmonics. Vorel's voice trembled over comm. Reciprocal exchange confirmed, no hostile patterns. Commander Irix spoke more quietly than Matteo had ever heard him. "Doctor, assessment." Matteo did not take his eyes off the glowing vessels. Reunion. The lead crystalline structure shifted orientation and opened along a seam, its facets unfolding with precise geometry. A corridor of soft light extended outward, reaching toward the shuttle. The organism turned toward Matteo. Green softened into amber. It extended a filament limb and brushed lightly against his forearm, just above the suit seam. The warmth that passed between them was steady and clear. "Gratitude," Matteo swallowed. "You found them." Gold pulsed once, strong and certain. He stepped back toward the inner hatch. "Go on." The airlock cycled open. Through the small reinforced window, Matteo watched as the organism drifted into open space. Its bioelectric field expanded around it, forming a luminous cocoon. It crossed the distance without hesitation and entered the waiting corridor of light. The crystalline vessel closed gently behind it. All 3 structures brightened at once, pulses synchronized in complex, layered patterns that filled the darkness around them. The shuttle rocked slightly as the wave passed, then steadied. Vorel exhaled audibly over comm. Energy output rising, controlled acceleration. The formation reoriented together and began to move, sublight engines or something analogous, pushing them away from the debris field, away from Orpheon. Matteo rested his gloved hand against the viewport. As distance grew, the pulses dimmed from brilliant violet and gold to faint glimmers among the stars. Then they were gone. Inside the shuttle, silence settled. Commander Irix spoke after a moment. "No pursuit, no aggression, no further signal." Matteo nodded slowly. "It never intended harm." "Not your granola bar," Irix said dryly, "may have prevented a diplomatic disaster." Matteo allowed himself a small smile. "It wasn't the snack." "No, it was kneeling." The shuttle turned back toward Orpheon, its engines humming steadily. The station's silhouette grew larger against the starfield. In the cockpit's reflection, Matteo caught his own expression, tired, relieved, changed. He pressed his hand lightly against his chest, where the warmth still lingered, faint but real. The organism had not breached containment to conquer. It had crossed barriers because barriers were noise. It had synchronized with a human heartbeat, not to manipulate, but to listen. And when someone finally listened back, the silence of space answered. By the time the shuttle docked, the xenobiology logs had already updated. Unknown species. Provisional classification revised. Empathic explorer. Non-hostile. Interstellar social intelligence. The horticulture module would be quiet again.